In the quiet hum of a darkened room, a phone vibrates, its screen a lonely beacon. The ringing cuts through the silence, insistent, unanswered. It echoes, then fades, replaced by the sterile quiet of a morgue. This is a story about a call that came too late, and the life that was lost before it was ever truly lived. This is the story of Sarah. It begins in the shadowed corners of a childhood home, where a little girl named Sarah often sat alone. The house was always dim, not from a lack of light, but from a lack of warmth. She was a quiet observer in her own life, a small figure against the backdrop of neglect. Her world was painted in shades of gray, a prelude to the darkness that was yet to come. She learned early on that silence was her safest refuge, that to be unseen was to be unharmed. She learned to shrink herself, to make her needs so small they were practically invisible. But a child can only be invisible for so long before they start to feel like they don't exist at all. Love, when it finally arrived, didn't feel like a grand symphony. It was more like a quiet escape. Her wedding day was less a celebration and more a silent agreement to leave one quiet room for another. She stood in a white dress, a fragile smile on her face, believing this was her way out. She married a man who promised her a new world, a different life, but some escapes only lead you to a different kind of cage. Her husband was charming, charismatic, a man who could light up a room, but behind closed doors, his light cast long, dark shadows. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, her world began to change. The bright colors of her life faded, replaced by the cold, sterile interiors of their home. His influence was like a creeping frost, chilling everything it touched. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His disapproval was a physical weight, his expectations a labyrinth with no exit. He isolated her from her friends, from her family, convincing her that his world was the only one she needed. He introduced her to a different kind of escape, a chemical solution to the emptiness he had so carefully cultivated. It started with a pill to calm her nerves, a drink to help her relax. It was a gentle slope at first, one she barely noticed she was on. Then came motherhood, holding her newborn baby. Sarah should have felt joy, a profound connection. Instead, a wave of guilt washed over her, so powerful it was suffocating. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at this tiny, perfect human who depended on her completely. How could she be a mother when she was so lost herself? How could she protect this child from the world when she couldn't even protect herself from the man sleeping in the next room? The baby's cries felt like an accusation, a constant reminder of her own brokenness. The pills became more frequent, the drink stronger. They were no longer a gentle escape. They were a desperate necessity. The turning point came in the sterile, fluorescent glare of a hospital hallway. After an overdose, she found herself waking up to the worried face of her brother. He held her hand, his grip firm, a lifeline in the churning sea of her despair. He didn't lecture, he didn't judge. He just sat with her, his presence a silent promise that she was not alone. For the first time in years, a tiny glimmer of hope flickered. In the darkness, he spoke of a place, a chance, a way back. He spoke of rehab. Rehab was a world away from the shadows she had grown accustomed to. It was bright, clinical, and brutally honest. The days were a battle. Withdrawal was a physical and emotional storm, tearing through her with relentless force. There were moments she wanted to scream, to run, to give up, but there were also small victories, a full meal eaten, a night slept without nightmares, a conversation shared with another person who understood the war raging inside her. She learned to speak her truth, to unravel the tangled knots of guilt and shame. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to rebuild the person she had lost. Coming home was supposed to be the final step, the triumphant return. Instead, it was a different kind of battle. The neighborhood she grew up in was now a field of judgment. She saw it in the whispers behind cupped hands, the pointed fingers, the averted eyes. The faces of her neighbors were blurred, their judgment a sharp collective sting. Social stigma is an invisible cage, and she felt its bars closing in around her. They didn't see the fight she had won. They only saw the addiction she carried. They labeled her, defined her by her weakest moments, and erased the person she was trying so hard to become. The support system she had built in rehab crumbled in the face of this quiet, persistent shunning. Loneliness became her constant companion once more. One night, the weight of it all became too much. The whispers, the stares, the suffocating feeling of being judged wherever she went. She found herself on a lonely street, the streetlights, casting long, distorted shadows. The familiar craving returned, a siren song promising a moment of peace, a temporary silence to the noise in her head. She fought it, she truly did, but the pull of the old escape was too strong. She turned and walked towards the darkness, her figure slowly disappearing into the shadows, one last desperate search for an exit. The end came not with a bang, but with the chilling silence of an empty road after an accident. Flashing lights painted a scene of quiet devastation, and then the final tragic phone call, a phone ringing in a quiet house, a brother answering, his world shattering with a few clipped, official words. The voice on the other end didn't know Sarah's story. It didn't know about the lonely girl in the corner, the fragile bride, the terrified mother. It didn't know about the fight she fought, the hope she clung to, or the judgment that pushed her back into the dark. It was just a notification, a life concluded, a file closed. Sarah's story is a tragic reminder that addiction is not a moral failing. It is a disease, often born from trauma and nurtured by silence and isolation. Recovery is not a straight line, and relapse is not the end of the journey unless it's the very last time. It's a sign that more support is needed, not more judgment. We have a collective responsibility to change the conversation, to replace stigma with empathy and whispers with open, supportive dialogue. If you or someone you know is struggling, please know you are not alone and help is available. Reach out, talk to someone. Let's make sure that for others, the call for help is made and answered long before the final one. Thank you for listening.